Yeah, this is tea time. Yeah, making a difference, one cup at a time. Tea time. So be sure to grab your tea, grab a seat, and tune in to Miss Liz. Tea time. Making a difference, one cup at a time. Tea time, yeah. Tea time.
Well, welcome to Tea Time. That's right. It is Monday. It is not Thursday. So you know what that means. It means it's a rescheduled Tea Time. So I want to welcome everybody for joining me today on Tea Time. But before we get started on today's show, I want to get you over to Miss Liz's YouTube channel. Give that little doorbell a ring and subscribe to the channel so you can watch these Tea Times at any time in your home, in the car, at a picnic, all of that good stuff. And what does Miss Liz offer you? Well, I offer you over 300 different interviews from different guests from around the globe with different stories, different books, different services and organizations, and all of that good stuff. So there's lots of good, juicy stuff in there. Now, today I have the incredible Fern Brady joining me, and she is back here. She was a guest that was scheduled for July, but you know what? Mother Nature hits us sometimes, and we have to just go with the flow, right? And that's what Tea Time's all about. We go with the flow. And I am honored to have her here. So let's do the disclaimer. Let's get some of Fern's bio out there, and let's get Fern in here and let's spill a tea on legacy in words. That's right. We're serving a different type of tea today. So get ready for that because we're going to have some deep conversations because we already started having some conversations in the background. So disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz myself is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment, please grant StreamYard permission to see your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that the content brought forth for any Tea Time show hosted by myself, Miss Liz, is always brought forward in good faith. However, may bring forth dialogues and opinions that are not representative of my platform. The facts and information are perceived to be accurate at the giving time of airing. All Tea Time guests and audience participants are responsible for using their good judgment and taking any action that may relate to the discussion. The content brought forward may include discussions for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It's significant to know that this show is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection and is not providing therapeutical advice. If you have any questions about the disclaimer or the panelist discussion, you may freely contact me, Miss Liz, through my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com. Moving forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in today's show in any aspect, I myself, Miss Liz, welcomes you. And should you decide that the show is not made for you at this time, I respect those wishes and see you at a later date, at a later show in the future. So again, all Tea Time shows are done on Thursday, 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's the original date for Miss Liz. If you see a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it's a rescheduled, surprise, or a special tea time that is brought to the table that Miss Liz feels that needs to come to the table. So now a little bit on my guest. Well, who is Fern Brady? Well, Fern Brady is the founder and CEO of Inklings Publishing. She began her professional life as a foreign correspondent and taught for 15 years in Alief ISD. She has published numerous short stories, 2 children's pictures books, and a couple of poems. Her debut novel, United Vidden, which is book 1 in her Thyrein's Galactic Wall series, I'll get her to say that, was given a glowing review by Doctor Who Online, the official site of the Phantom. Love Calls, which is a book 1 of the Dragons and His Kitten, released in 2023. She also has a graphic novel collaboration, Mr. Landen Library, with the amazing, talented Rosa Maria Garza. She has returned to the leadership of the Houston Writers Guild, with whom she serves as the CEO for 4 years previously and is a full-time teacher again for the Fair ISD. I'm going to get her to tell us what that ISD is because I'm curious about it. Now let me get Fern in here and let's spill some tea with you all. Welcome, Fern.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So did I anything that I mispronounced? I'd like you to say it so that we can get it out there correctly.
The ISD?
Yeah. Well, the Thyrein Galactic Wall.
Thyrein's Galactic Wall. is what I call it. And that's very much, it's interesting because when you're looking at literature, right, you're reading a book, a lot of times in my head, I will be pronouncing the characters' names or places in a certain way, especially with fantasy stuff. And then I hear other people pronounce it, and I'm like, oh, wait, that's not how I've been pronouncing it in my head. But I think it counts however you pronounce it, you know? I had that with what's the character's name in Harry Potter? Hermione, right? I think that's how you pronounce it, right? Hermione. That's how we found out on the movies. But like, I don't remember. I had been pronouncing it in my head, completely different, you know. But yeah, so Galactic Wall is the universe in which my novels are set. Basically, it's an alliance of 51 planets that was formed by Thyrein, the dragon heart, who was able to uh, get everybody to unite when there was a big threat in the universe. We are actually in the middle of it. They are all around us. Earth is technically, there as well. And the characters come to Earth every once in a while, kind of secretly. But there's a very specific reason why Earth is not, drafted into or brought in officially. And that's because we are not ready technologically to be brought in, right? So they are kind of biding their time until our technology is there so they can kind of approach us. And that's downstream many, many books from now.
Well, that's really cool. And I love that you said that about Harry Potter because there are things that we can't pronounce the same way, right? Because either a language barrier or something. And I think it's okay to be imperfect and say, you know what, I can't say it. So let's get someone else to say it, and let's get it out there. But I really want to thank you for that, Fern.
The word chasm, right? It's CHASM. And I'd always pronounce it in my head chasm for some reason, but then I heard somebody actually pronounce it, and it's chasm. But I think when a reader mispronounces a word, I think there's an honor to it because you've been reading it, you know.
So let's get in. I'm going to take you way back now. So who was Fern as a little girl and who is Fern now?
Fern as a little girl is a very nerdy little creature who, just was wanting to live in books. I loved stories and I loved reading. And so my dad filled our household with books on the Knights of the Round Table and adventures and mythology and a lot of very fantastical areas and books like C.S. Lewis, Narnia and stuff. And so I grew up living in other worlds and believing in dragons and in magic and pretty much staying away from real world, which was a harder place for a real Fern because she was a little chubby girl, and so definitely was on the end of bullying. Right, I was continuously being bullied, and didn't quite fit in. And so books were the escape. Books were the place where I resided and hid out away from the bullies.
So Fern, what got you into publishing?
Ah, well, when I had already originally been teaching for Alief ISD, the independent school district here in Texas, and we had been doing that for many, many years. And I met some people from the Houston Writers Guild, and I got involved with the organization. I started going to their conferences and meeting agents and publishers. And I met a lady named Pamela Fagan Hutchins who had started self-publishing herself because at that time, Amazon had opened up a platform. People could publish themselves. And so she wrote this book called What Kind of Loser Does Indie Publish and How Can I Be One Too? And I read it and I thought, why do that? I could run a small independent little publishing concern. I could publish my own books. And I thought, because it takes a lot of entrepreneurial elements. Of course, you have to be a business owner at heart, but beyond that, it has, you have to have a certain willingness to do the due diligence of making sure the product is a high quality. You can't just slap it up there super fast. You have to really work the craft and then work the quality of the mechanics and the grammar. And so I thought, I could do this. And I had some money saved. I had some money saved up. And I thought, I didn't have any books ready at the time, my own books. And I thought, well, if I start with some short story collections, some anthologies, that would be nice. I could, publish a vast array of voices, and start with multiple authors, with these short stories, and then try to there. And so that's really what inspired me was this book that said, hey, here's how to do it. Here's the basic essence of, step 1, 2, 3, right? Here's how you do it. And I thought, yeah, I could totally do that.
So how did you get the name?
Inklings Publishing. Well, so my favorite authors are C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, right? And they had the Inklings Society. They formed the Inklings Society with other contemporaries of their time, and they would meet in each other's homes. They would read each other's work, and they would critique each other and help each other. They would do writers' retreats and things. And so I'd always loved the Inklings Society name. And so I thought, well, I'll just take Inklings and add publishing to it. And that's how we got our name. It's a nod to my favorite authors.
I like the name. It makes me think of ink dropping on paper.
Yeah, and the lady that did our logo, she did a lot of political branding and working with the different school board politics and campaigns and things, and she came up with this logo, and I was like, oh wow, this is so you nailed it, right? The little ink pot and feather from way back when.
And that's what I like. It's the history, right? And that's what we were talking about before we went live, right? Is the legacy. So I want to get into the legacy in words because that's the tea that you gave me. And we were talking about that backstage before we went live about the legacy on how we don't speak about it enough. So let's get into the legacy in words and what that means to you, Fern.
Yeah, so when you're kind of creating a company, one of the business plan elements, things that you have to kind of really think about is your why, right? Your why are you doing this? Okay, yes, you have the skill set, you have the money, whatever, but why do you really want to do this, right? And as I kind of explored that idea for myself, like, why am I wanting to invest in books? Why do I want to have these books out here available for people to read? Why am I investing in these particular authors and their voice and their message and their books? And I realized that really, as a woman who, being 50, I just turned 50, and not having had any kids, I know I'm not going to have heirs, right? I'm not going to have children and grandchildren and so forth. And so to me, this is my legacy, right? The words and the messages and the themes, and the entertainment and the stories that are left behind in these books, my own writing as well as that of the authors who I publish, this is my legacy. This is what I leave behind, and in many ways, I feel really honored because this is a legacy that may impact many generations to come. You don't know years from now who's going to pick up one of these books and who's going to read a story and have some kind of a response, a reaction, a desire to do something different for our world because they read something in one of the Inklings Publishing books and by one of our authors, and so it's a legacy that will endure, and that's the hope, for generations to come. These words will impact hopefully many people.
Well, and that's it, right? In 10, 20, 30 years, we don't know where our books are going to take us and who's going to read them and You know, who's going to be reading that book and saying, "Oh, does she have more? Does he have more? Like, can we get more?" Uh, so let's talk about your books. When did you start writing your own books? Because you're publishing other authors, but when did you start writing your own books, Fern?
Well, I've always been a writer, so I've always had, manuscripts of this and that, floating around. I recently opened up a tub of writer's notebooks, from when I was a kid, a teenager, and I realized I read a lot of pirate stories, during one period of my life. I don't know why I was so in love with pirates in that moment,
They're
but
cute. Come on, pirates are so underestimated. I think they're feisty, and they're
and
the bad boys, right?
so funny because like a lot of the characters that I love the most are outlaws, right? Technically, kind of outlaws, kind of rebels, but there's a honor to them. There's honor codes to them. So I really love that, and I think that's one of the things I loved about pirates so much. They had very egalitarian systems, really, considering the time they lived in for their ships. And I think that's why also I found a random Viking story that I had written, because Vikings, so apparently I'm into that kind of crazy stuff. But I've been writing these, but the world of Thyrein and his galactic wall and these planets, Planet Jorn, that was born in my classroom. I taught sixth grade for 15 years. And in fifth grade, we have social studies, world cultures. And so every year, we would talk about geography and how the geography of our planet affected the development of cultures. And we talk about different government styles and the elements of culture. And every year, I would have the kiddos make a planet. They would draw a map of an imaginary planet, and they would put different geologic features on it. We would create different boundaries of political divides, and we would develop our own stories. We would develop some mythologies for these people, government stories, the call to adventure quest stories, and there would be other creatures in it. So we would develop stories across these planets. And as I modeled, for the writing pieces, I was making my own planets, right? I made Planet Jorn and Verena and Amiel and the whole drama with what's going on in there in United Vidden. And so these stories were born in the classroom, in my with my kids, writing and modeling and having them create their own cultures. And what a better way to learn about world cultures and how culture develops and how it changes, right? Is by creating your own, making your own up, and making up your own laws and rules and mythologies. And so they had a blast doing it. And over the years, these stories just got collected. And when I took time away from being a full-time teacher, was working mostly with writing in the schools and doing part-time teaching, I started doing more of my writing. And that's when I met this lady and started a publishing company. And that's when I got real serious about building these books. And yeah, these worlds had captured me, beyond anything else I'd written. These were the more developed because I'd spent so many hours with my students working on them.
So when you wrote your first book, how long did it take you to write it, Fern?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so United Vidden came out in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. And it took, to get it to a place where it was really ready, it took about 10 years, to be honest. Yeah, because I had started in the classroom, like I said, but it was very fluffy in the classroom. And we revised some because we're working on revision as well. But we had not done anything real deep. And so when we got more serious with it, that's when it began to morph. And it really was a product of the critique groups that the Houston Writers Guild hosts, being able to share my pages and get some feedback on how other people are receiving it. how it's landing, what is clear, what's not clear, what needs to be more developed. And my work with Max Regan of Holodeck Press. I had the pleasure of meeting him through a mutual writing friend who invited me to one of his June retreats. And he is amazing. He's a great editor and he's a writing coach, and he looks at your work, as a whole. And, he has been the one that has helped me to really form a cohesive element to my universe. And so, yeah, it took about 10 years for it to really be in a place where you could say, oh, yeah, let's get it out there. Which
I
is
think,
why I authors, right? Because like it took me forever. That first
well,
one.
and I think it's important for the listeners and audience to hear this, right? That not every book is written in 2 days. Some take years for you to get it together. And so if you're thinking about writing a book and you're like, oh, I can't do it, I can't do it in 2 days, I can't do it in 2 weeks, because there's so much pressure on book writing in today's world, right? And especially with the AIs writing all their own books and all of this now. It takes away from the process and the journey of writing these books and putting the content together and building the characters and all of that. So what was the hardest part for you to write in the first book?
I think the hardest part for any author, I think, is realizing that the first draft really seriously is a hot mess that needs to be fixed. We all would love to write a scene, write a first draft, and send it to an editor or whatever, and that person say, "Oh my gosh, it's genius! You're magnificent! Don't change a word." We would love for that to happen, but the reality is that doesn't happen. There's always a lot to be improved, and I think that is the hardest part of writing, is not wanting to rush. We all want to hold our book in our hands. We all want it on Amazon. We all want it to be a bestseller. But if it's going to have a lasting legacy, it has to have depth. And in order to develop a story with real depth, with characters with meaningful lives and meaningful changes and nuances that will resonate with people and make an impact in our world, then we have to take the time to actually develop that, to be willing to work it and rework it and rework it and get sick of it and keep going and not give up on developing the best level it can be in a rush to just get it out there.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? We go right back to the legacy again. A legacy is not rushed, right? It's not done in 24 hours. It takes time. What legacy are you guys leaving behind? What legacy would you like to leave behind? For all my listeners out there, I really like to know what your legacy is, and join the conversation. If you have any questions or anything, throw them in the comments. If you want your name to be seen, you can private DM us Liz on the Facebook page, and I'll get the questions out. But I think legacy, we don't speak about it enough, right? And we keep going back into the legacy on this conversation because it's deeply important that we take the time to understand what we're leaving behind. I'm going to switch it up a little bit, Fern, and I'm going to take you onto a different planet, a different time, a different zone, right? We're going to travel today, and we're going to have some fun. You gave me the legacy in words, but before we went live, you shared an important story about a cup. And tea time is about the cup of ourselves, right? So I want to go into that cup. You have a special cup with you, and I want you to share the story of this cup for the listeners out there so we can take a deeper look into our cups.
Okay, so this is the cup, and when you invited me on your show and it was tea time, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be drinking from this beautiful cup, because this cup was purchased by my mom, and she bought a set, and it was for her and for me, and it's just ours. And so when I hang out, when we sit together to just have a mom and daughter time, we make our coffee, not tea, Sorry, not a tea drinker.
And that's okay. We don't need to drink tea on Tea Time with Miss Liz, right?
But we drink our coffee with this beautiful heart cup, and it's really cool because she has hers and I have mine, and they're matching, and it's kind of our special moment when we sit down together to drink from these. Like, we don't use them every day. We use them on very special occasions when we're gonna have these, mom daughter talks. And kind of circling back to legacy, that is a legacy in of itself. Being able to share with your parents, grandparents, have taking some time from your world to meet with these beautiful people and get their stories, get their wisdom, gather it up. We don't take time anymore to sit and drink a cup of coffee or a tea and just talk about life, about where we've been as a people, as a family, and the great wisdom that's lost, as we lose our grandparents. I had the privilege when my grandmother came the last time before she passed away. She decided just arbitrarily to, have me sit down with her and write down some family recipes. And, she tried to like say, okay, well, how much of this spice or that spice, right? But, those recipes don't have exact measurements. It's a pinch of this, a little bit of that.
Right? The grandma recipes was how many cups is that, grandma? You try to write, I don't know, it was a cup and a half, maybe. I don't know. I just went with the flow. Oh, a little bit. Oh, I needed that, a little bit more sugar, taste it. But that was the thing, right? They were always tasting as they were creating.
Yeah.
And we've gotten out of that as well. We're just throwing ingredients together, throwing things together, throwing words together, and we're not taking the time to taste it and to serve it and understand why we're doing this and why we're going to these different journeys and paths and that. And that's why I said I wanted to take you to a different planet, a different galaxy, right? Because that was a different time. The legacy of grandparents, right? The legacy of connection and having that moment, making these special moments and holding on to them. And tea time always goes in a different avenue. I never know where it's going. That's why I like to meet my guests a few minutes before so we can get into different conversations. And sometimes the guests are like, "Oh, I kind of like the way we did that." So, Fern, we travel in life on these paths and journeys, right? Like, you got into the publishing before you even started writing but you were doing short stories all along. You were teaching all along. So you're working with words all your life in different ways. We have a question here. What is the ISD?
Oh, ISD is Independent School District. So basically, it's the public school system in Texas, where I live. We have different school districts, and they're independent of each other, although they are connected by the Texas Education Agency, of Texas. But each is, like you read about Houston ISD. It's the independent school district for Houston, the metropolis, and then like Alief is kind of a suburb area. ISD, Fort Bend, Cy-Fair. These are all kind of the surrounding kind of suburbs, if you will, neighborhood areas. They used to be independent cities that Houston sort of swallowed up as it grew, and it kind of over, and it's still growing. God only knows how big it's going to get. It's an ever growing city. It's currently like the fourth largest in the United States.
Oh,
yeah, Houston. It's quite an incredible metropolis, and it's funny because it's big and it's a city, and you have the feel of being a part of a city, bustling, but at the same time, it has a lot of a more small time feel as well. Like when you're living in these areas, these little neighborhoods, you have a little bit smaller pace, but not really because you're still in a bustling city. Traffic is horrible. Just dreadful.
well, isn't there a saying about Texas? Everything is big in Texas.
Mhm. Yes, we have definitely the biggest, pretty much everything, including roaches, which is just dreadful. Those things should never have gotten this big. I don't know what's going on with that.
Right? And that's what I mean. We're traveling to Texas, right from our own homes right now, guys, right from your cars, wherever you're listening in, right? We're traveling and we're getting to see the big Texas.
Gosh, yes. And we recently here in Houston had a hurricane come through, and a tornado had come through shortly before, and so we had quite a mess with our power structure and infrastructure for. That's why we had to reschedule, because oh my gosh, we were literally powerless, which is an interesting way to spend your 50th birthday. Let me say, the week of the hurricane was my birthday week, and I thought, well, what a way to enter to the next, half century of my life, with a hurricane in the dark, powerless. Great. Hopefully that's not an omen.
I want to take you back to the age of 50, because I just turned 50 in May too. Did you feel like this transformation in your life when you turned that big 50? Was it like a life-changing moment for you?
It, it was exciting. Like, I don't know how it went with you, but like, I was excited. I thought, oh my God, I've lived a half a century. Because we say 50, and that's a nice number. It's a very daunting number. But when you say it as a half of a century, right?
Yeah.
That has a different feeling. It feels so much more like, you've reached this point at which you're like probably more than halfway through your life when you think about it. Because, I mean, how many people live to 100, right? I mean, that's the goal. That's my goal anyway. I want to live to be 100 at least, But it's a heavy marker, and you think to yourself, okay, where am I? What have I been doing? And where am I going? Right? That's a huge question. I feel like the years that end in zeros, right? You're 40, you're 30, you're 20. These are really important ones because they're times of assessment of like, okay, I've closed a decade. Where am I going next? When you close a half a century, that's a big one to look at. Like, okay, where have I been? Where am I going? And how's it going? Do I need to make some changes?
Right? It's like an eye-opening. I know when I turned 50, it was like, I've lived this long, and what do I want to change in the next 50 years?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And
It
you
was,
start very serious about your health, right?
yes.
Because when you're young, under 50, you have this sense of, oh well, I can eat a little bad because I'll be better later, right? But the consequences start showing up. They start showing up. And so you start thinking, okay, if I really want, and especially when you're a writer and you're thinking about a legacy, right? There's so many books in this series. There's so many stories in my mind. I know what I want to create, right? The bigger picture. And you start thinking, well, I better start getting a little healthier. I better start doing some exercise, start eating a little bit better because I want to last. I need to, they don't get written super fast, right? So if I'm going to make it and have, a good opportunity to really birth all these novels, then I better get serious about being healthier.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, right? When we're 50, it's really an eye-opening to see like all of the stuff that we've done. And it's like you said, like it's half a century. And not all of us will make it to 100. My grandma made it to 97, and she refused to make it to 100. She's like, I've seen enough of this world. I do not want to make 100. And here I am. I want to make 100 because I want to have my granddaughter be able to celebrate her 50th birthday with me. These are the things that I look at. Is it possible? Absolutely. If you look at your health and you look at the story and the legacy that you're leaving behind, it's a time to reflect on your life. And that's what tea is, right? We're reflecting. We're taking that time and that moment to recharge ourselves. So I want to get into the second book. The first book took you almost 10 years. So how long did the second book take you, Fern?
The second one didn't take us long. It took 2 years to bring it out. Love's Call. Now it's interesting because Love's Call is actually book one of a smaller series that happens before the events of United Vidden. One of the characters that is going to be very important for the closing of the whole thing, like how everything concludes, is really a minor character, Nikamir. But he is a half dragon, half human. And what happens when you throw in dragons in stories is they have a tendency of wanting to take over the whole narrative. Okay, they think they should be the focus of everything. All right. And so I told him, you can't take over this narrative. This is not your novel. This is Brenna and Emil's story. It's not you. So he insisted he needed his story told. And so I created Love's Call to kind of give us that background of who is Nikamir. And as we see him in developing in the main line, what I call the main line of the series, we, when he comes to that place of making that choice and helping in the way he's going to help, it does help to see why, his why he does that, and it's because of his own journey, right, that he's had. So this is Love's Call was Nick and Danipia's story, and how how he is managing his own storyline, and what he's going to end up doing. And you do see him, like I said, in United Vidden, you see him a little bit, and in War Rising, which is coming up in December, that is the story, the second part, right? What's happening next? You get to see him more. He starts interacting with them more, and you're going to see him more and more. But you can't build him into this story because this is not his story. He needs his own book.
He's got to wait. It takes time to build that dragon.
I like that. You have to be careful. I always tell people when I do workshops, right, writers workshops, I always go, look, if you get stuck, throw in a dragon, because they'll get the story moving. But you have to be very careful because they will take over. And before you know it, the story's all about them, right? And it was hilarious because this one lady was like, well, Fern, but I don't write fantasy. I write, normal stuff. And I was like, well, what about a dragon inn, right? What about if your characters go to Dragon's Inn? And later, like, she texted me, she was like, Fern, it actually worked. It worked. Like, yeah, just be careful because the story will not circle around that dragon inn. The spirit of the dragon's there.
That dragon really pushes us, right? Because but there's these little tiny dragons sometimes, that can really just take us on a different journey and take us by surprise. So in all of your books, are there dragons?
All pretty much.
So we got the dragons, but we don't got the pirates, right?
We love the pirates. Okay, we love the pirates. I have to say those stories really were dreadful. Like, I mean, I was very proud of them at the time I wrote them. But like years later now, looking at that, I'm like, oh my Lord Jesus, I seriously needed some serious help with these words. But it's very interesting because I love stories with dragons and elves and dwarves and other creatures. In United Vidden, the original inhabitants of planet Jorn were lizard people, the Gortiv. And there's 4 different kinds of Gortivs that lived on the planet. And then the colonized worlds of Drulin and Fratern, they arrived and they colonized Jorn, and they moved the Gortiv onto the continent of Parthia because it was less desirable for them. And so they've been there all these years, and now for the first time they're gathering together, uniting under one leader who is wanting to say, hey, this was our world and we want it back. And so it is a really interesting exploration. A lot of the genesis for that storyline came from a lot of the conversations around Columbus Day and our Native Americans and how they were treated and how their lands were taken and their cultures. And so a lot of the genesis of, this idea of, hey, what happens when, colonizers come and what happens when people try to say, hey, we want our space back, and how do we manage a reparation? What is just in these circumstances? So a lot of this series, this first arc in the Thyrein's Galactic Wall universe, has to do with this idea of the colonized worlds and the people and the different people, and how do we see people who are different? These are lizard people. They're humanoid lizards, right? How do we live with and coexist with completely different kind of looking people, right? Is it, I think Star Wars sort of plays with that as well, and Star Trek as well to some extent, these beings that don't look like us,
Yep.
right? How do we, it explores this issue that we have of prejudices, and, why does everybody have to look like us? Why can't we just enjoy that different cultures are different, and they look different, they dress different, they do different things, and why can't we enjoy that? It's an
Exactly.
interesting exploration.
Well, it's enjoying the differences between each other. One might like blue, one might like purple. Doesn't mean that one is better than the other. Because everybody has their own likes and dislikes and beliefs, and so why are we devaluing everyone else's beliefs and likes and dislikes, and say no, you shouldn't like that, and you should, a lot of shooting going on in this world. Where I think what I like about Galaxy stories and storylines like what you've done, Fern, is you've opened up the mind of understanding the difference between different planets and different individuals and species, stuff like that as well. And we have species around us all the time. We have plants, we have animals, we have it's right in front of us, you know. So when you're reading these stories about dragons and fairies, it's right there in front of us.
Well, think about shark infested waters, right? You read these words. Really? I mean, because as far as I know, sharks live in the ocean, okay? They're not infesting the water. That's their natural habitat, okay? The fact that you chose to enter into their water, okay, go into their homes, and that you look yummy to them is not really the shark's fault. It's not like they're out there trying to be mean sharks infesting these waters and killing these swimmers, right? This is their natural habitat, and we go there, right? And we have this very egocentric view of like somehow the sharks should just stay away because now the humans are here. Or you see stories of alligators entering neighborhoods, or you see the stories of the coyotes, right? Or the wolves or bears. It's like, well, technically they have a right to exist here. This is their planet too,
Yep.
and we are taking ourselves into their space. So don't be surprised if we have interactions with them, right? And so a lot of this, the beauty of fiction, I think, is that it allows us to explore real issues, complicated issues,
Yep.
in a very non-threatening environment, because we're no longer talking about Native Americans. We're not talking about black versus white, right, or racism. We're not talking about lizard people. Okay, we're talking about lizard people, and so we can explore these issues without so much of that natural defensiveness that comes when those conversations arise, right? We can explore them with more ease because they're about lizard people. We're talking about lizard people on another planet. And so we can have that conversation more openly in many ways than when we would sit down and go, let's have some tea and discuss racism and white supremacy in America, right? That is going to be a very heated conversation versus let's talk about Gore-Tips, and those lizard people over there, right? That's
And how did they drink their tea?
do they drink tea?
Right? Well, the lizards, they drink with their tongues. So, there's a different way of drinking their tea. We tip it up and they they stick their tongue in. There's different ways. But what you really said was really important, Fern, is, animals coming into our habitat. Well, we're going into their habitat. So it works both ways. We can't say they can't come in our home if we're going in their home. So I think it comes right down to respect, right? Respecting societies, respecting species, and understanding them instead of being so in the mood of just taking everything out, right? Let's just remove this. Let's start understanding. Let's start getting to know each other. Let's start having these conversations like we're having right now, and let's talk about the lizard people because, there's different species out here. Do you feel that there are lizard people on the planet right now?
Well, look, there's a whole conspiracy theory.
You're right. Yes, Miss Liz went down that path because I have heard of the lizard people.
So are they real and are they on Earth? Well, I don't know. But I wouldn't put it past them. I really wouldn't. Because, that's the whole premise of my book is that Earth has a sacred path, right? And we are not in a place where we can be brought into the more understanding of these beings who have space abilities, space travel abilities. And so they have to kind of buy their time because, technology wise, trying to integrate us would be too difficult at this level, right? They are going to integrate us when we get to a technology level where it would make sense, right? It would be, the transition would not be so hard. And so that's the premise, right? Because everybody's always like, well, if there are aliens and they do space travel, why haven't we met any, right? That's why, because they're like, we're backwards. As far as they're concerned, we're and so they're waiting, they're biding their time, right? But they visit us, right? And so who knows? Who knows about those lizard people? But I feel like if you're gonna make up a fantasy world, I feel like there should be a nod to a lizard person somewhere because I don't know, there's not enough lizard people in literature.
Fern is looking for those lizard people. Come on, share your stories. So I want to get into some of the authors that you work with, Fern. You work with a lot of different authors, and I've had a couple of them on Tea Time. So, how did you connect with these authors, and what type of authors do you work with?
Yeah, so Inklings Publishing is really a wide press. So we're looking to sort of have a little bit of every genre eventually. And so we started really, like I said, with these small short story collections, the Eclectic writing series, and that's how we met our first author. Meg Hafdahl was the first author that we had, and we met her because I was helping another publishing company do a short story collection as well, and she submitted there. And then we had Eclectically Criminal coming up, and so I really liked her story and her voice. And so I was like, hey, we're opening. So if you want to submit over here. And then she did. And so, and then when I read that story and we included it there, I thought, wow, this lady has a beautiful voice in horror, very unique and compelling. And so I approached her actually. I was like, hey, I really like these two stories, and I would love to do a short story collection with you. She was really a short story writer at the time, and so she was like, yeah, that'd be great. So that was our first author, and we did the Twisted Reveries series, 13 Tales of the Macabre, and then we followed it up with the Twisted Reveries 2, which explored the town of Willoughby, Minnesota, which was featured in a couple of the short stories. And she was like, "Oh, I'd love to like kind of delve deeper into this town that I'm creating." And then we moved into like, "Hey, what about a novel based on that town and the history that you're now creating? You built a world, right? And that's how we got into her novels and such. So she was our first one, and that's kind of how we met her. And then we have Andrea Barboza, who is a contemporary romance writer. And she wrote a story based on mythology, right? It's a godlike looking Greek hero, right? And he is an archaeologist, and he comes to Houston. He meets an archaeology student, and they fall in love, right? And he did something interesting with that one. Most series in the romance genre have a closure, like the couple they fall in love and they have a happy ever after in that book, and then the next book in that series takes a different couple, right? That is in that same storyline, but like a minor character now has their romance. It might be a brother, a sister, a friend, right? But we actually did a trilogy with Andrea Barboza under her pen name Andrea Bailey, where actually the romance doesn't close. And they don't have a happily ever after in book one. They actually end up splitting in book one, and then they come together again in book two, and then eventually in book three they finally have their happily ever after, right? So that was a very different take. And being a small press, we can do that, right? We can take a little bit of liberty with some of these genres and stretch, and maybe not meet exact, because we're playing with what we can market. And it's an interesting thing as we watch readers receive that. They're not expecting it because the genre, this is newer in the genre. So we have Andrea Bailey, and we also have Mac Little. Okay, she's writing a pirate story, much better pirate story than I wrote. Let me tell you. Okay, she's magnificent. And her stories are all about the 16th century Caribbean era and the Maroons, the enslaved peoples there, and how they created, they freed themselves, and they created a society there. And it's an area of slavery, the history of slavery that we don't usually read about, that we don't hear about. We think about it only kind of in terms of the mainland US, but in other parts of the world and in the New World, there was a lot of slavery. And so this kind of, and she mingles it with pirate stories and romance, and it's wonderful. And her writing is beautiful. It's just poetically beautiful. It's just, I fell in love with her writing. And most of these authors met through the Houston Writers Guild or through projects like we put out a call for submissions. And then we are open for submissions. Jalen Els is one of our authors. She wrote a series of Avalon, right? Based on it's a contemporary girls. They get pulled into the land of Avalon, and they have adventures there with the Knights of the Round Table, and kind of a surprising twist to some of those characters. And we met her. She submitted. She just submitted to us, and out of those submissions, we picked her book. Barbara and Carl is our latest one. Short story collection again of stories that are set in the restaurant. That's the newest volume that we've published. She all these stories happen, and they're all sitting in a restaurant, and we get to see this couple's story and this other, and the maitre d' and the bus boy, and so it's kind of surrounding this evening at Tony's is the story. And she's working on a murder mystery that's going to be a little trilogy there. So we're looking for, she's doing our murder mystery kind of genre, but we're looking for all the genres, right? We're really wanting to bring in a little bit of everything. My father has a Ramon Del Villar. He's one of our authors. Let me tell you, working with your father as your author can be complicated.
Just can imagine.
But he, because he worked for the federal courts all his life. He retired, and so he has seen a great deal of cases and all kinds of situations, legal situations. And so he writes characters, an attorney. It's an attorney that is here in Houston and he has these cases. And especially he goes up against banks because, in my father's opinion, banks are just evil. And I agree.
I can just imagine how it is to work with your father, especially when it's with family, right? Because then you got to give that hard feedback back, and you got to be like, I'm not sure about this and where you're going with this and all that. So
We had to assign him another editor. Couldn't work with me because, we would be a little bit stronger with him. Like, these are the revisions we.
and he probably pulled the dad card.
Yes, it's not easy. Let me tell you, it's not easy.
So, Fern, if anybody would like to reach out to you or to connect with Inkling Publishing, how can they reach out to you?
Well, you can just go on to our website, inklingspublishing.com. We are open for submissions through the end of this month. Actually, we have a window open. We've been collecting wonderful options, and our acquisition editor is looking at options right now. And then you can connect to us also with fernbrady.com. That's my personal author website. And yeah, we're on Facebook. Mostly we're on Facebook. We had Twitter. We're not very successful on Twitter. I always tell authors, like, pick the one or two platforms that you can do well. And then, really push those and don't worry about the others, because it's better to do a couple really well and deeply and connect with your readers than to try many and not really have much success. Meg, for example, is really great at Twitter. She has a great following through Twitter, and she's not that big on Facebook. So it's really about what works for you and finding that one social media or two platforms that really work for you. Jay Lynn does TikTok and Instagram videos. I know.
My son got me on TikTok. I think it's like 3 years, 4 years now I'm on TikTok, and I'm still trying to figure that thing out 4 years later. Like, but I get the stuff out there, and I'm thinking all the other stuff. I'm just like, you get so focused when you get on those platforms, because then you're wasting time, I find. For the longest time, I was watching people scoop up gems for hours, and I was like, I'm not even getting these gems. Why am I watching this? You know. So, Fern, what final message do you have for everybody out there?
The most important thing is to really explore why. I really like that is the one question you need to ask yourself on a regular basis, at least once a year. You need to really sit down and look at, why am I doing what I'm doing? What am I doing? Where am I spending my time? Which is a really valuable resource that we often misspend because we don't pay attention to it. And, ask yourself, is this something that is purposeful? Is this bringing a return on investment I want to accomplish in my life? And really explore why. What is your purpose? Because I find that if you really have a purpose, if you know why you're here and what you're trying to do with your life, the legacy, right, that you want to leave behind, what are you trying to accomplish? Then you will be more focused and you will be more successful. Rather than, just sort of not really. I see a lot of that with retired people, right? If people retire from, it is not as powerful as if you retire to, right? You retire to do something that you've been wanting to do or such. But don't wait for your dream, right? Don't wait until then. Start building it now, and it's hard because it's a lot of work, but it's a good way to spend your time.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you on my platform and getting into these different conversations and bringing legacy to the table, right? So if anybody would like to know more about Miss Liz, you can check out my website at www.missliz's.com, no S on teatime.com. And if you'd like to connect with Fern or have her as a guest, reach out to her. Again, her website is www.inklingspublishing.com. Check her out there. Check her out on Facebook. And I want to give a special shout out to Mickey Mickelson, who has given me another incredible guest. Check him out as well. Creative Edge, right? I think
Yes.
I got it right. I got so many of these people that that come to me, and I just want to thank you all for working with me and collaborating with me to have these incredible conversations. So let's keep the tea flowing, and I will see everybody on Thursday with 2 new TEAs to serve, and we'll see where that takes us and have a good conversation. So until then, keep serving your tea, and let's just make a difference one cup of tea at a time with real life stories and words. Until then, Miss Liz will see you on Thursday.